14 days, that's how long President Trump says Russia's Vladimir Putin now has to convince him that he's serious about ending the war in Ukraine.
Do you still believe that Putin actually wants to end the war?
I can't tell you that, but I'll let you know in about 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, we're going to find out very soon. We're going to find out whether or not he's tapping us along or not. And if he is, we'll respond a little bit differently.
Of course, it's been months since Trump first proposed a ceasefire. Russia is now proposing a new round of peace talks, which would take place in Istanbul next week. This is Germany is boosting its defense support for Ukraine, including helping Kyiv develop its own long-range weapons. Those missiles could conceivably hit inside Russian territory. Here was the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in Berlin today as he met and welcomed the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
We
are financing a considerable part of the country's Starlink cover, and our defence ministers will today sign a memorandum of understanding on the procurement of long-range weapon systems from Ukrainian production, so-called long-range fires. There will be no range restrictions. Ukraine will thus be able to defend itself fully, even against military targets outside its own territory.
Joining me now is Roderick Kiesewetter of Germany's Christian Democratic Union Party. He has been a member of the German parliament since 2009. Thanks so much for joining.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Schulte.
First, as you know, it's been months since President Trump proposed a ceasefire in Ukraine, yet today he announced he's giving the Russian president another 2 weeks to decide if he's serious. Do you believe that President Trump is giving Russia too much time here? And do you believe that eventually he will actually impose new sanctions?
Well, I believe that Putin is very serious to continue the war and even to escalate. He's exploiting the willingness of President Trump for negotiations, but Putin has any power to continue the war because we, the West, are split, also the US with its allies, and that Ukraine has not the means to defend itself for the next months and weeks if we don't support them.
Do you believe that the U.S. under President Trump is still a fair mediator in this process?
We don't need the United States as a mediator. We need the United States as a strong ally of Europe. So we in Europe have to take over more burden to help the Americans to focus on the Indo-Pacific, and we need the protection of the United States, that we have a kind of backstop in supporting Ukraine, especially with long-distance fire, like it was arranged today in Berlin, but also to contain Russia, because otherwise Russia would continue the war against Moldova, against the Baltic states, and even Poland. So we have to contain Russia, and there's no willingness on the Russian side to negotiate.
You have said that by, in part, sharing Russian propaganda about the war in Ukraine and the causes of the war in Ukraine, that the U.S. has, in effect, changed sides in this conflict. Do you still trust America's leadership, not just in the war in Ukraine, but for Europe's own security?
Well, I trust the Hill, but I do not trust the current administration, because they are not neutral arbitrators. They have already given Putin a much leeway. For example, Ukraine must not become a NATO member, Ukraine has to hand over territory, and Ukraine must not receive NATO troops. So this agenda of Trump is leaving Ukraine as a sacrifice to Putin, and we Europeans have to understand to organize our own security. And hopefully we will at least keep the nuclear umbrella of the United States over Europe. But nevertheless, the United States are not a reliable partner in supporting Ukraine. They are a reliable partner for Putin to break Ukraine into pieces. Sorry to say that.
Wow, that's quite a remarkable statement. Let me ask you then about Germany's own security, because there have been some German officials and others who have openly discussed extending France's nuclear umbrella to include Germany in large part, because Germany no longer trusts America's nuclear umbrella. Do you trust it?
Yes, I do trust. I'm a retired full colonel of our general staff. I worked at SHAPE with Jim Jones, John Craddock, and with Admiral Stavridis. I served for more than or nearly 30 years in the armed forces, also in the Balkans and in Afghanistan. I do believe in the American people and in the Hill. But what we need is to convince all Americans who think transatlantically that Europe must do more. But on the other side, we Europeans are an added value for the Americans, especially regarding to safeguard the sea lines of communications in the Indo-Pacific. But we Europeans want this transatlantic partnership. But what we not want is Trump to support Putin in splitting and destroy Ukraine. So what we need is that our transatlantic partnership shows the value of peace, freedom, and self-determination. Peace is not an armistice, and negotiations should be even-handed and safeguard the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. So this deserves more European endeavor, but also a common transatlantic understanding and willingness.
I noticed you said there you trust the Hill, as in Congress here, and the American people. Do you trust President Trump himself?
Well, then he has to change. I was already 8 years ago one of those members of parliament who criticized that he was questioning the cohesion of NATO. Now he isn't questioning the cohesion of NATO. We are questioning, is he supporting Ukraine, yes or no? Or is he supporting Putin? Putin has to fulfill no conditions. Putin has received a lot of awards so far without stopping the killing, without stopping detaining children, without stopping destroying the infrastructure and the hospitals in Ukraine. So what should we do to urge Putin? And this is key to Trump, that we can trust him, that he will contain Putin and not make him as a new trade partner of the United States by neglecting all the war cruelties in Ukraine.
Roderick Kiesewetter, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time.